Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Patrick, and I'm the chair of Strafford County Democrats. We also have Isaac, who is our secretary. He helped put this event together, so very appreciative for that. This is our first forum, and we started off the Executive Council. It's a good-sized race, but it's a very important race to us here in the county. So we felt it's important to start off with this and make sure all these voices get heard. So we certainly appreciate all of you for taking the time to do this, and we certainly appreciate all of you taking the effort to run. Running for office is not an easy thing. It is obviously something that we all have to do here in New Hampshire, but everyone seems to do it at a different time. So 2020 is certainly an exciting time to do it. So I thank all of you. I do know of you, and some of you are new faces. So it's great, and I'll be the first to brag that Strafford County Democrats are the best. We work really hard. We're very well organized. This past year, we have invested over $15,000 to local town committees. We doubled the amount that we usually give them, and we know that our town chairs know how to handle these races best, what's happening on the ground. So we feel our role is to support them the way that we can, and we have a lot more work to do. So thank you very much for joining us. I know that Isaac sent out how this is going to go, so I'll just start with repeating that. So what we're going to do is we have a list. We put everyone's name in alphabetical order. Leah started off as number 1, and Cindy is number 5. So Isaac, we're going to pick a number 1 through 5, and Isaac taught me today that you can just say, "Hey Siri, pick a number 1 through 5." So I'm going to do that with my phone, and we're going to go from there. So what we'll do is we have 5 questions, and the first person to go, we ask that everyone try to answer the question in 2 minutes. If you can't, understood. But the first intro, your first question, you also have 1 minute to do an introduction. And then the last question, you'll each have a minute to do an outro. So I'm going to start off with, "Hey Siri, pick a random number 1 through 5.
A random number between 1, and it is 1.
All right. So we're going to start off in order. So we will start off with Leah. Leah, here's the first question. And again, you have 1 minute to do an introduction. So the first question is, we're obviously facing a very challenging economic situation, one that's one of the hardest we have in living memory. What can the Executive Council do to help Granite Staters?
And thank you. Before I answer, should I give the 1 minute intro and then answer the 1 minute question?
Yes, please.
Okay,
yep.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I'm following the rules here. So my name is Leah Plunkett. I am running for Executive Council here in District 2 because our state is at a crossroads, and we have the opportunity to fill this crucial seat with a bold, progressive leader with proven experience fighting for a stronger, socially just New Hampshire. I'm a mom of young kids, a law professor, a recent first-time author, and an associate dean at UNH Law in Concord, where I live with my husband and my kids. We moved here 13 years ago to raise our family, and I've been fighting for our kids and all kids here in New Hampshire ever since. I am a former Planned Parenthood trustee. Most recently, I was chairing the Planned Parenthood New Hampshire Action Fund Board when I stepped down to run for this seat, and I'm a current ACLU trustee. And I want to take the same frontline social justice activist spirit that I have brought to my board service to the Executive Council, which, as everyone knows, is the Board of Trustees for the state. To turn to your question about the Executive Council's role in doing economic rebuilding in the course of the pandemic and really Great Depression level eras, levels of inequality and vulnerability, the Council has a crucial role to play. The Council is responsible for approving or not all state spending, major state spending over $10,000, and making sure that federal funds that come into the state for rebuilding are used properly is a crucial job of the council. The council also has a crucial role to play in approving or not contracts with third-party vendors and ensuring those contracts are going to vendors who provide the kind of living wage, racial equity, privacy protection, and other crucial civil rights and civil liberties protections to their staff and the services they offer for which the state is contracting.
Excellent. Great. Thank you much. So next on the list would be Emmett. Emmett, you can start out an intro. Do you need me to ask the question again?
No, I'm good. Is it 1 minute and then 2 minutes, or 1 and then 3?
1 and then 2. 3 total.
I'll get this eventually. Hi, everyone. I'm Emmett Soldati, reporting live from Somersworth, New Hampshire, where I was born and raised, and I own a restaurant here to this day, though it is currently closed. I'm also the chair of the Somersworth Democrats, where last year we successfully chipped away at the old boys club of Somersworth City Council and have the most LGBTQist city council in our state's history because of the work of the Somersworth Democrats and of course with the support of the Strafford County Dems. And I'm running because I'm the only person in this campaign that comes from the margin, the literal fringe of our state. And I feel for too long communities like Somersworth, small, property poor, rural fringe spaces haven't had enough representation in Concord. And I'm hoping to change that and speak to the voices of marginalized communities, not just geographic, but also in relation to their immigrant status, people in recovery, LGBTQ people, people of different ethnicities, bi and indigenous people. And I think bringing them in will always lead to strength because that's the lesson I learned here in Somersworth. To answer your question about economic recovery, I am a small business owner that had to forcibly close my establishment, a dine-in establishment. I'm also the only candidate running that is currently on unemployment. It took about 6 weeks to receive my very first check due to a very old legacy technological system embedded in the New Hampshire Works unemployment system. A couple ideas that we need to recover from this. First, our Department of Revenue Administration, the commissioners which are appointed by the Executive Council, are not well connected to sole proprietors or small business owners like myself. We need higher restaurant and small business ownership representation on all economic boards, but in particular, the Department of Revenue Administration. The second is I'm very concerned about retirement. As an executive council, we are responsible for approving the appointments to a New Hampshire retirement system. And that money is not just dependent on what's paid in by public employees, it's dependent on the markets. And if we don't have people sitting in the New Hampshire retirement system that are focusing on a future-oriented investment strategy to make sure that their pensions and their retirements are covered, then we're going to do a disservice to our retired and elderly population here in the state. And lastly, we need to modernize our technology. The unemployment system that's been built on Fortran does not work. It broke for tens of thousands of Granite Staters, and that's unacceptable. We need to plan for the future and elect someone that has an understanding of how technology can be used to our advantage.
Great, thank you. And as a flag, Isaac is tracking the time, so if you see a little note in the chat box, he's keeping track of you. All right, so next up is Jay. 1 minute intro and 2 minutes to answer the question. Let me know if you need me to read.
Great. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Jay Sertikowski. I'm a New Hampshire native. I live in Concord, but I actually, mostly when I was younger, grew up in Somersworth and Dover. Outside of work as an attorney, I'm the chair of the St. Paul School Summer Program Board. I serve on the Courier Board. I was born at Pease Air Force Base. Both my parents were jet engine mechanics, a skill that I did not inherit. My father was actually a Dover firefighter his entire career. My brother was born at Wentworth Douglas, and I represented that hospital for 13 years. And, you know, I just feel I have a deep personal connection to the district. I want to bring a new, fresh perspective, maybe a little bit more of an independent voice than some of the other candidates, but that's where I'm coming from. And I will, I'll end it under a minute because we'll have a lot to talk about.
All right, thank you, Jay. So next up, we have Craig. Craig, again, 1 minute intro and 2 minutes for the question, and let me know if you need me to repeat it.
No, I'm good. Thanks for having us all here this evening. You know, I got into this race because last fall, at that time, there were 3 attorneys from Concord in the race. And it seemed to me we needed a voice from outside of that area. I live on a small farm in western New Hampshire, in the Monadnock region. Unlike everybody else in this race, I'm actually a state legislator. I'm a small business owner, and I consider myself a progressive to the core. I've used the opportunity in the State House to advance progressive legislation. I sponsored the single most far-reaching climate bill in the House this year. I've worked to make banks treat their customers fairly here in New Hampshire. I've tried to protect minority rights, and I've tried to make it just a little bit cheaper for our high school kids to go to college here in New Hampshire. I'm also dedicated to running a campaign that rejects funds from the fossil fuel industry and corporations and lobbyists. I wish I could say that was true for everybody in the race, but it's not. But the single biggest issue we face is climate change. And we have to remember that every member of the Public Utilities Commission and the Site Evaluation Committee is a gubernatorial nominee approved by the Executive Council. So if you want to see action on climate change in New Hampshire, you need a climate champion on the Executive Council. And I'm that person. Now, to your question, you know, I have, as a lawmaker, as a legislator, worked with constituents over the last 3 months to make sure they can get their benefits. My own farm, my own small business, we were one of the lucky ones who received a Main Street grant because we were looking at really significant losses going into this year. So what things can we do from the Executive Council to improve that, to work on raising wages and economic recovery? Well, let's go back to the fact that for far too long, establishment Democrats in the legislature have put downward pressure on a real living wage. As a state representative, I was told we should support a minimum wage of $12 an hour, when we all know that a real living wage in New Hampshire is closer to 26. So when I'm on the Executive Council, any business that wants to work with the state, to contract with the state, is going to have to answer to me, what is it they're paying their lowest waged workers? And if they're not paying a living wage, then we have to look long and hard and really question, do we want to be engaged with that type of company? It simply makes no sense for the state to do business with corporations that pay their employees so little that those same people are relying on the state for benefits. So I think I've probably hit my 3-minute mark. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Craig. All right, Cindy, 1 minute intro.
Thank you. I'm Cindy Warmington, and I am running for Executive Council because everything that we value is on the line in this election. The right to vote, the right to choose, the right to marry the one we love, healthcare, education, workers' rights, climate change. It's all on the line this time. And we need to make sure that we elect an executive counselor who's ready on day one to have the experience and ready to do this job. And I would bring to the Executive Council 40 years of healthcare experience, 20 years as a healthcare attorney. I chair the health law section at Shaheen and Gordon, and 20 years in healthcare as a frontline healthcare worker working in laboratory medicine. I also was the first in my family to ever go to college. I worked my way through college, and I am a product of public education. I am also the chair of the New Hampshire Democratic Party. I started out some 25 years ago, knocking on doors, marching in parades. Before I knew it, I was chair of my town committee. I was standing at the polls. I was making phone calls. I've done that grassroots work. I continue to do it in every election today. And I chaired my town committee. I was secretary of my county committee, and now I'm chair of the New Hampshire Democratic Party's platform committee. And I volunteered my time in mental health because that really is a population that has been without a voice, and they have suffered so much stigma over the years, and they need someone who can speak for them. And I have dedicated my time to that. And what we can do on the Executive Council is lift up the issues that are most important to voters. Voters care about healthcare. That has become so incredibly important, and the disproportionate and the disparities that have been shown through COVID have been laid bare, that we can see that it is so critically important that people have access to diagnostic testing, that people have access to healthcare providers, that some of the things that we've seen come out of this, like telemedicine and diagnostic testing, we need to keep those and make those available to everyone. We can ensure that by looking over some of the biggest contracts that come before the state in healthcare, the Medicaid managed care contracts and other contracts that come before the state. We can make sure that we are prepared for the next wave of COVID, which may inevitably be coming our way in the fall. We also can lift up the issue of education, children's education, and what we've seen and the disparities here during COVID are just, have really lifted up the importance of having a commissioner of education who believes in public education. And we don't have that right now with Frank Edelblut. And the Executive Council is the one that makes the decisions to approve or not approve a candidate. Workers' rights, critically important. We've seen how important having paid family leave has been here during COVID. It's going to be important as we rebuild from this. I can see that my time is up. I could go on and on about the importance of the Executive Council as we rebuild from this crisis. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Well, we do have more questions. So the next question, and we're going to start off with Emmett. A good section of Strafford County will be within your district. So our next question is, what are some of the top transportation priorities for Strafford County? Emmett, 2 minutes, and you're on mute.
The biggest one, and one that really runs through the heart of my campaign, is infrastructure really distributes our priorities in this state, and it speaks our values as a state. And if you drive north on Route 16 from Portsmouth and you hit Dover, you get exit 9 there. And if you keep going just a few miles more, you hit exit 11 to Rochester. There's literally no exit 10 on the Spalding Turnpike, and that would take you to Somersworth. And that is a decision that someone on the executive council made several decades ago when they were updating the highway signs not to include. And so I think when we talk about our 10-year infrastructure plan, we can't just speak to the past of where we thought people wanted to go in this state. We actually have to go into those communities and listen to the needs of their local economies, their small downtowns, because I, as a small business owner in downtown Somersworth, lose out on that traffic, lose out on that tourism. I'm a big supporter of rail and the commuter rail that's being talked about, and the feasibility money that we can get from the feds. But the Central Corridor is not New Hampshire. And we need to recognize that we have an equitable transportation system that makes Granite Staters and visitors to our state have access east to west in our state. And I would fight particularly for communities out here in Strafford County for that exit 10 and making sure we have adequate public transportation up and down and east and west. And I would do the same to reach into communities from Charlestown, Walpole, and Keene, because they are saying the same things in the Monadnock region, that it's too hard to get there. And that should not be the position of any community in the Granite State.
Great, thank you, Emmett. Jay, you're next. What are some of the top transportation priorities for Strafford County?
Right. So back in September, when I first launched a listening campaign, before I decided to run for this office, I went to Somersworth and I went to Dover and I went to Walpole and I went to Westmoreland, and transportation was one of the top issues. And, you know, I think a councilor really can bang a drum for worthy projects, whether it's the bridges on the Vermont border, or as I heard loud and clear from Somersworth, as Emmett alluded to, having a Somersworth exit off the Spalding Turnpike is critical. It's essential, and it's crazy it hasn't happened. Electronic tolls on Route 16 would also be important. You know, the council has a great capacity to be a bully pulpit for some of these transportation issues. And with such a district that does stretch 114 miles from Vermont to Maine, we have some commonalities. And I really, I would thoroughly agree with Emmett that, I mean, when I lived in Somersworth, it was weird to me that we had to kind of take a snaky route to get to the highway. And that was 30 years ago. So it's a very important issue and a good point to bring up, Patrick.
Thanks. Yeah, I know I'm getting flashbacks from high school when people had no exit 10 bumper stickers on their cars. So that was. All right, so next up, Craig, that question is for you. What are some of the top priorities for transportation in Strafford County?
Well, they're the same priorities we have in the western part of the state. You know, it's ridiculous, but where I live, you have to go to Vermont to go north to come back into the state. The quality of roads in the western part of the New Hampshire, and really throughout far too much of New Hampshire, are really second rate at best. But when we talk about the 10-year transportation plan, we need to be thinking beyond just the roads we take to work and school every day. We need to be talking about how our transportation plans fit into climate change. Right now, there is essentially zero state funding for public transportation in the state of New Hampshire. That's ridiculous. We can do better. We have to do better. You know, add to that the need to rebuild far too many bridges throughout the state, whether it's in Strafford County or my own county, and we see the results of too many years of underfunding our infrastructure. And that's something that we need, as any one of us as a potential executive counselor needs to be prepared to lead on. I'm certainly happy to beat that drum, because the reality of the second-rate highway infrastructure that we have here in the western part of the state is something I face every day. And I say that as someone who lives at the end of a dirt road. So, you know, I think that it's not just about Strafford County, it's about thinking about the entire state and where we want to be in 10 years and not where we are right now. And making sure that those plans are consistent with our need to push back against climate change.
Great, thank you. Cindy, you're next. Same question.
I think it's important to see transportation as a social justice issue. Allowing for transportation around our state allows equal opportunity to people to travel to places to work, to go to school. For those who do not have the funds to own their own automobile or keep an automobile running, public transportation provides an opportunity leverage. It levels the playing field. It's critically important to see transportation in that light. Before before COVID, I had the opportunity to travel to Somersworth and Rochester and Dover and to meet with each of the mayors in those towns. They have all since endorsed me, and they each talked to me about their transportation issues. I agree, exit 10 in Somersworth is critical. There is an exit that Rochester needs to have reworked, and the mayor of Somersworth talked about workforce housing in Dover that is feeding a rich community further south, and the need for public transportation to address that. And I think one of the critical things to know about the Executive Council is that the Governor's Advisory Council on Intermodal Transportation is the one place where the Executive Council actually makes a recommendation to the governor. It's not the other way around. It's the job of the Executive Council to go out and conduct the listening tour, to listen carefully to what everybody needs in their communities, and to bring that information back and integrate it into the 10-year plan. In addition to traveling to Strafford County, I also had the opportunity to travel into the western part of the state, and with Representative Lucy Weber, go and visit each one of the bridges that are in a state of disrepair. And should they come down, will detrimentally impact the economy of all of our communities along the river. And then also here in Concord, we have the widening of I-93. And that's a huge issue to make sure that that doesn't just become a north-south corridor, but a place that will stimulate the economy of Concord. There are transportation issues all across this district that we all need to listen carefully as a member of the Executive Council and make sure that we have a 10-year plan that meets the needs of our people.
Great, thank you very much. Leah, you're next, same question.
I agree with much of what has been said around seeing transportation as a social justice issue, as a climate issue, as a workforce development issue, and also making sure that the council's recommendations here are guided by the needs of the folks living in these communities. Focusing on the education part of Strafford County, on the university, it is critical to gathering folks from across the state to be able to get them over to the UNH campus, and also to bring folks in from out of state to, in a safe, socially distanced way this fall, but in hopefully going forward in a more inclusive way, to be able to have access to the university from folks coming up from other parts of the country. I think that we right now do not make it easy to get into New Hampshire or to get around in New Hampshire if you do not have a car, and improving the bridges and accelerating rail are crucial to that, and crucial to continuing to get folks. I'm so sorry, my brother is trying to reach my children to FaceTime reading with them before bed, so he's going to have to wait a little bit. But it's so crucial to having he's just not giving up. He really has a lot of reading to do. To having access to the university, and ultimately to supplying the workforce that employers are looking for in the state, and that the folks of the Granite State are looking for job opportunities as we move through and recover from the pandemic.
Great, thank you. For whichever one of you will get elected, I have a feeling that you'll be working closely with Nichols, the executive director of Coast Bus out here, something that we're very proud of, and it's very important to the area. And also Strafford County Regional Planning Commission is just full of excellent transportation planners, and is a real asset that we're proud of here in the county. So the next question is going to start off with Jay, and this is right on topic. What can the Executive Council do to reduce carbon, promote sustainability, and address climate change?
Yeah, the council certainly has an extraordinary capacity as basically the board of directors for New Hampshire to scrutinize these multi-million-dollar contracts. And, there is no reason that the council can't really drill down and say, look, you know, is this the best for the environment? Do we have the best vendor here? I've seen the governor, I've seen other councilors urge caution or pulling back contracts to see if they can get something a little bit more sustainable. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think that it's a free market. And if you have a green vendor, you know, maybe they're a penny more, but that's not such a bad thing. So, you know, I think the council really, because of its huge portfolio of contracts, hundreds and hundreds of contracts, they really can have an impact, whether it's being climate conscious or also, as Cindy referenced, I believe, being conscious of how we can be better to our workers and making sure that we have vendors with living wages. So Councilor Valinsky's done a good job of that. And yeah, I think it's a pretty extraordinary power. It's very strange. We're the only state that does it, but I think there's a lot of potential there for sure.
Great, thank you. Craig, you're next. If you need me to
Sure.
repeat the question.
No, I'm good. You know, the climate crisis is what motivates my campaign. It's not an abstract issue for me as a farmer. I see the impact of it every day. And let me just say, it breaks my heart that at the moment we have a Commissioner of Agriculture who is approved by the current Executive Council who does not for any practical way believe in climate change. That ends when I'm on the Executive Council. And it's not just the Ag Commissioner. As an Executive Counselor, I will ask every nominee, do you believe in man-made climate change? And if they don't, they won't get my support. And if they do, the follow-up question is, then what are you going to do about it? But this goes back to what I was talking about with the Public Utilities Commission and the Site Evaluation Committee. Those are the organizations, those are the boards in the state that can put a stop to something like the Granite Bridge pipeline. And we can't stop climate change in New Hampshire if we keep building more fossil fuel infrastructure. That's exactly what the Granite Bridge pipeline is. And so, you know, to get really down and really granular with this, I would encourage everyone who's watching this evening to go to the Secretary of State's website. Take a look at the financial filings that some of us as candidates had to do the other week and look for one name, Hal Montgomery. He's the lobbyist for Liberty Utilities. It shouldn't be lost on anyone that he's handing out money left and right, including in this race. It shouldn't be lost on anyone that Liberty Utilities office is right across the street from the State House. So we need to make sure that the Executive Council is populated with people who aren't already owned by the fossil fuel industry. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Cindy, you're next, same question.
Climate change obviously presents an existential threat to our planet, and we need an Executive Council that believes in science. Let's start with that. I have a Bachelor of Science. I believe in science. I think we need policies that promote energy efficiency and economic growth and renewable energy, and we need a statewide climate action plan. And as others have already said, we need to appoint commissioners to Department of Agriculture, to the Department of Environmental Services, to the PUC, to the Site Evaluation Committee, and you know, that will believe in climate change, man-made climate change, and who will do something to stop it. And we need to make sure, in addition to that, that we ask questions of vendors. But asking questions of vendors when the contracts are already fully baked is not very helpful. The contracts come to the council on Friday night, some 200 of them, some huge stack of them, and they get voted on Wednesday morning. It's an up and down vote. And you know, they're fully baked at that point. And I sat down when I first started contemplating this race with Andy Valinsky and said, listen, I've seen what you're doing on nominations, but tell me about the contracting process. How much are you able to move the dial? And he said, you know, a small amount, because they are fully baked and we get them so late. So I said, well, what if you could go into these agencies 6, 8, 10 months in advance and start asking these questions? And this is what I want to see when that contract comes before the Executive Council. And he said, that's where the real opportunity is. I talked to the Commissioner of Health and Human Services, who confirmed that's not a pie in the sky idea. If you have the time and the commitment, we can make that happen. That's my commitment to make that happen.
Great, thank you. Leah, you're next. Same question. What can the council do to reduce carbon, promote sustainability, and address climate change?
The Executive Council absolutely needs to put climate change front and center and recognize it as the existential threat that it is, and recognize that climate, in addition to the ways in which I agree that contracting and commissioner appointments are absolutely crucial, also recognize that the council has a central obligation to ensure that we are being the citizens' eyes and ears in Concord, and that we are hearing from folks on the front lines of how climate change is impacting their individual lives and their families' individual lives, and then drawing the links for the government and for the people through our convening power between the threat that climate change is posing to public health and public safety. Our campaign does weekly kitchen council sessions. People sometimes refer to having a kitchen cabinet of trusted friends and advisors. We call ours our kitchen council for obvious reasons. We did one for Earth Day that featured a lineup of folks talking about issues from the big picture policy to the home front kind of micro level. And I think that one of the things that came through loud and clear is that we are living right now in real time through the catastrophe of having a state government and a federal government, but a state government that has not been completely prepared for this level of public health and public safety crisis. And climate change does heighten the risk that we are going to have more public health and public safety crises, whether it's in the form of, heaven forbid, a future pandemic, or more natural disasters or other shared catastrophes. We need to make sure as a council that we are fortifying all of our administrative agencies with competent, ideally courageous leaders who are going to be ready for those catastrophes that climate change, as we work to dial it back, is likely to inflict. And I see that I'm out of time.
Great, thank you. Emmett, do you want to close it out?
So all of Strafford County sits on the Salmon Falls River, and that is the most threatened water source in America, not just in New Hampshire, not just in Maine, in America, according to the EPA. One of the reasons being the highest number of private abutters that want to skirt conservation and other regulations for it. And so if you come and you get an espresso or a tea at Teetotaler, you are drinking out of the Salmon Falls River. That is our lifeblood here in Somersworth. As a business owner, that's important. Climate change is not something that's abstract, happening far away. We need to protect our ecological resources here in the Granite State. And I have to agree with Craig. We can pay a lot of lip service to supporting science and supporting climate change, but if we don't follow the money, we wonder why new solutions never actually move forward. Back in 2017, Eversource botched a maintenance here in Somersworth and closed my business for 2 days. I didn't get any revenue for 2 days. And when I complained and I went through their claims department, there was no answer. They said they have a monopoly. They don't need to do anything about it. I ultimately had to sue them in order to get any kind of compensation for what they had done. And if you look at our political world here in Concord, you'll see that at the end of the day, we have a monopoly around legacy fuel and legacy fuel interests that are not going to change how they operate in the state, regardless of whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. It's why I took the fossil fuel pledge. It's why I'm not taking money from corporate lobbyists. I'm not taking money for anyone that supports the fossil fuel industry. And it's time that we have a candidate and a council and an entire government in Concord that recognizes that the threat of climate change is real and is not worth lining our pockets with.
All right, great, thank you. So next one, we're going to start off with Craig. The Executive Council has blocked several of Governor Sununu's recent appointments. Has the council overstepped its bounds? Is it becoming too political?
Absolutely not. That's the reason the council's there. And it's why it's so important to have an independent, progressive voice, especially in this seat. You know, we know this seat is going to, in all likelihood, be won by a Democrat. So the idea that we would have a moderate Democrat or an establishment Democrat or a mainstream Democrat who half the time may well go along with the governor doesn't make sense. This is a progressive district. And as a progressive, I think that if anything, the council needs to stand up to Governor Sununu more and more effectively. You know, we all talk about how unfortunate it is that Frank Edelblut is a commissioner of education who doesn't believe in public education. But that type of thing happens all too often. And it is the role of the council to lead the band, especially when it's in opposition to a Republican governor. But I would go a step further. You know, as the only candidate here with actual legislative experience, there's a real need to make sure that the council is working hand in hand with the Senate and the House. You know, right now, Democrats control Senate, House, and the council, but Republicans keep getting their way. As far as I can tell, there's very little to no synchronicity between the Senate and the House, or the Senate and the House and the council. And that ends when I'm on the council. You know, to me, part of this job means going to Senate leadership and House leadership and saying, look, where are we? Where do we want to go, and how are we going to get there? How can we bring maximum pressure on a wayward governor like the one we have now? So if anything, to my mind, the council needs to play a more forward role. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you. Cindy, you're next. Same question. Let me know if I'm going to repeat it.
No. The executive council is working hard to hold Sununu's feet to the fire. We need to do that, and the governor's complaints that the executive council has become political are laughable. I have only 2 words for him, and that is Dot Graham, a very highly qualified nominee for a judge position, while Sununu was on the executive council, which he voted down. They voted down on the sole basis that she was previously a public defender. We'll go back to the Kelly Ayotte nomination, where the executive council simply was told to the governor that that they would accept no one but Kelly Ayotte. And so this newly described outrage by the governor that we have suddenly become political is laughable, really. But really what I'm talking about for the executive council is pushing our values, using the role of the executive council in ways that has not been done before. Again, using that contracting process, which has not been done before, to get in early, to get the questions asked in the request for proposal that you want to see the answer to demand to see the score sheets, to really push our values by using the power of the executive council. I completely agree that we need to have, especially in this role, in this district, we are the progressive voice. We will speak out, and we will push the values through the role of the executive council as far as we can possibly push them.
Great, thank you. So yeah, you're next on that one. Oops. Leah?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear correctly. So I have myself on mute because my kids are running around. So I have been on the very front lines of standing up to this governor's unacceptable nominees, and I'm in this race to continue doing just that. I was chairing the Planned Parenthood New Hampshire Action Fund last summer when Sununu nominated Gordon MacDonald to be the Chief Justice of our state Supreme Court, and I knew I needed to act. And in my role as chair, I stood up for reproductive rights. I banded together with some of New Hampshire's fiercest feminists to stand firm on having a Chief Justice who respects the healthcare rights and all rights of girls and women. And let me tell you, not everyone was my biggest fan when I fought this fight. It's not easy. It is hard to stand apart from dozens of others in your profession, at the legal profession, who are showing public support for the sitting Attorney General. And so it was thought likely the next Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court. It's much easier to go along with the crowd or whisper at the sidelines, but I'm very proud to have boldly and publicly fought that fight, writing op-eds and helping to lead the charge in a very public, very firm way. And I am committed to continuing to stand on the very front lines as an executive counselor of ensuring that any unacceptable nominee, hopefully we don't see them anymore. Hopefully we don't have a Sununu administration, and we're working hand in hand with the Democratic governor to have acceptable nominees. But if we don't, I have already demonstrated that I am loud and proud and firm about standing up against unqualified candidates that come before the council.
Great, thank you. Emmett, you're next.
Could you state the question again, Patrick?
Yes. The Executive Council has blocked several of Governor Sununu's recent events. Has the council overstepped its bounds? Is it become too political?
No, I don't think it's become too political. I think that's what it's there for. And in that vein, I agree with all the folks that just spoke before me. Obviously, as the chair of the Strafford Dems, I'm going to do everything I can to vote Sununu out of office, and I encourage everyone to join that fight. But there's something worth mentioning in this question because I don't think it's going to come up in this forum. The most recent two individuals we're talking about were Black men that were appointed or potentially nominated. And the challenge has become, though we probably don't agree with them on values, we probably don't agree with the nominees on politics, that's not what the conversation that we're having. We're having a conversation about qualifications. And far too often, the concept of experience or qualifications disqualifies marginalized people. There are plenty of times in my life that I've been told I'm not qualified for a position, and I can imagine the number of people, particularly Black people in this country and in this state, that have had that. So I actually agree they should have had at least a hearing, even if we don't agree with them on values. New Hampshire does have a race problem, and we're not going to get out of it just by saying, oh, this one individual wasn't qualified. The problem is for too many years, we've paid lip service to diversity, and yet we still have all white boards. We still have all white commissions, and that's why we're dealing with this challenge in 2020. Every single mayor in Strafford County, or at least in the Tri-Cities, has put out a statement saying all lives matter. One of them wants to put up a sign in Dover that says all lives matter. I am here as a candidate to say Black lives matter. We need to stand with people that are oppressed and are facing brutality and police violence, and we need to actually act to do something about it. And it starts with giving people a full hearing.
Great, thank you, Emmett. Jay, closes out with you.
All right, well, I am a little different from the others in the crowd. You know, the council needs to be a check, absolutely, on the governor. That is in our DNA as a state. As a native, I value that deeply. However, I am concerned the politicization of these appointments is deeply troubling. We have an African-American man yesterday, a pretty great accomplishment in his fields, a Dover resident, I might add, a veteran, a police chief, a former police chief. You know, look, he ran against Chris Pappas. Chris, I know, Patrick, you work for him. I've known him since we were 17 years old. We were in the same dorm at the summer program at St. Paul's, 2 doors down. We're dear friends. But I am deeply mystified as to how this fellow, who I deeply disagree with on policy, was not granted the courtesy of a hearing. 105 days go by, and this fellow doesn't even get a chance to bring in his colleagues, his friends, anybody that wants to speak for him. Do you remember Merrick Garland? We have a deep and troubling double standard in this party. Give him a vote, give him a hearing. I'm, you know, again, would I have voted for him? Maybe not, but this is not the New Hampshire I grew up in. This is not the way the council used to be. I think you need to be civil, you need to be courteous, and you need to give people a chance. This is a person, and he's the second African-American in 2 weeks who's been blocked from doing some public service. The other guy wanted to be a volunteer in the state board. Again, I may not think he was qualified. I may think he was the wrong choice. But I'm very troubled, especially in a time of great racial tumult in this country and this state, that we are not treating people with respect at the council level. You can be a check, you don't have to be a jerk, and I feel very strongly about that.
All right, thank you, Jay. Okay, so this is the last question. So what we're gonna do is you have 2 minutes to answer the question. You have 1 minute to do an outro. We will start with Cindy. So Cindy, the last question, and again, you have 2 minutes to answer the question, 1 minute to give a little outro. District 2 is one of the most gerrymandered districts anywhere. It borders Maine, Massachusetts, and Vermont. How will you represent such a wide district? When we redraw the lines, what should they look like?
Well, I mean, obviously we need, if we redraw the lines, and I hope that we have control over the governmental bodies so that we can redraw the lines, we need to make sure that the district is more representative. And, you know, I mean, some obvious things is Keene should go back to District 5 and Durham should go back to District 3. And we need to redraw those lines in a way that it is more representative. With respect to I'm sorry, I missed the very first part of the question, Patrick. Could you repeat it?
District 2 is one of the most gerrymandered districts anywhere.
Right. How would I represent the district? Well, even before COVID, I began traveling around the district. I think it's incredibly important to me to listen. As chair of the New Hampshire Democratic Party's platform committee, I've spent years traveling around the state listening to Democrats. I need to travel around the state and listen to what the people of the district need to hear, need to tell me. That's the best way to be representative. Constituent services in this district is going to be incredibly important, and I think I am committed to that. And one of the things that's important for me is I recognize that there are people like our governor who are working full time to undermine our rights. And I believe I am the only person in this race for whom this will not be a part-time job on top of their full-time job. I am prepared to give this job my full-time attention if elected, and I think that's an incredibly important part of making sure that we can represent such a big and wide district. As far as my outro, I say it's been a pleasure to run in this race, and while I would love to be out and about in the district and meeting people, right now that is impossible, but I have been heartened by the broad and wide support that we have received all across the district. We are running a very strong race. We are strong enough in this race so that we can lift up our whole ticket, that we have an organization that is prepared to run not just through the primary, but all the way through the general election so that we can lift up the ticket. And that is incredibly important for this district. We need to engage voters across this whole district to bring out, we need to run up the score in our Democratic district so that we lift up the whole ticket. I have been talking about running up and down the ballot since day one. I have done that as a grassroots activist for more than 20 years. I will do that as a candidate. I will do that as an executive counselor. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Cindy. Leah, you're next. If you want me to repeat the question, and then again, you get 1 minute to do an outro.
Thank you. So in terms of representing a district that is roughly half the size of a congressional district, I agree that crisscrossing the district, whether it is in person when circumstances permit or doing so virtually, is absolutely crucial. I was so enjoying going everywhere from west to east and in between before we were ground stopped. And now that is my dad trying to read to the kids before bedtime. But as you can see, we are all staying virtually connected. And I think that is absolutely crucial. And as an educator, and an NEA endorsed candidate for my work in education, one of the things that I have been doing in my day job is making sure that our students at University of New Hampshire School of Law continue to have their same level of education, their same level of connectivity as they did in a brick and mortar world. I also study digital connectivity and digital life, and have written on it as a legal academic. And so I think I am uniquely positioned to understand the different ways that digital tools can be used safely and effectively, also to stay connected, also understanding, of course, that we have real inequities across our state in terms of access to broadband and digital connectivity that need to be addressed. In terms of an outro, I am very proud to be a full-time working mom of 2 young kids in our public schools. Well, one is in our public schools, the other will start kindergarten in the fall. And I think it is so crucial to have people on the executive council who are not professional politicians. The council exists to be the advocates for the people. And we have so many executive counselors who have served admirably, including in this seat, while also engaged in professional life. And certainly I am proud to come to the table as somebody with a stake personally in raising young kids as a mom here in the state, and as somebody who has proven, while showing you the kind of counselor I will be on the campaign trail, while having 2 young kids at home, while continuing to work full time, that I'm right there on the front lines with all of you trying to do all of the things now increasingly in pandemic mode. And I think that that is an asset for a counselor, not a liability.
Great, thank you very much. Emmett, you are next. If you want me to repeat the question, so, and you have 1 minute to do an outro.
I think I'm good this time. Thank you, Patrick. You know, it's nice to hear all the candidates visiting Somersworth. I think it might be the first time we've gotten so many people here. So if nothing else, I think that's great. But at the end of the day, driving around the district isn't enough to getting to understand the experiences of lives on the margin. You know, I'm a restaurant owner in an incredibly property poor town that sees schools close every decade. And the experience of that, we are the highest taxed industry in this state at 9%. That's one of the highest in the countries. And so trying to own a restaurant or a small business in a community that doesn't have an exit off the highway, doesn't have a high tax base, and has incredibly high property taxes is something that a lot of folks in the state can identify with. And that's my lived experience. And so the way I think about representing this district is not just about visiting communities, it's about speaking to the experiences of what it meant to grow up in a town that was largely forgotten about, that people told me you couldn't make anything of yourself in. And we proved people wrong by listening to our neighbors, lifting up voices from the Indonesian community, from the LGBTQ community, from the recovery community. And those successes and that story of transformation is what I hope to bring to the entire executive council. In terms of the district, I really do think we need a redistricting commission. I don't think it should be a bipartisan redistricting commission. It should be a nonpartisan redistricting commission. It's not enough for the Democrats to say we should get in power and then we draw the map, because that undermines the electorate. It gets people in Somersworth that have never seen their power, never felt or understood why they should even go to the voting booth, because the people that they admire, they look up to, never get elected. But if we bring their voices and community leaders, regardless of their party affiliation, people that are involved with economic development, people that are involved with schools, to help us draw those districts, we'll have districts that actually reflect the neighborhoods and communities that want to transform New Hampshire for the next generation. At the end of the day, I'm running because I am a townie of Somersworth, and I am a product of Somersworth, and I was told for far too long that Somersworth is not a place to make yourself of. And I and so many others in my community proved people wrong. And I think that New Hampshire is full of proud townies that are waiting to connect with a sense of vibrancy, waiting to connect with their neighbors over shared values. But we need someone to go first, and we need our government to look more like the communities on the fringes and not just Concord. And that's why I hope to get your vote on September 8th. You can go to emmettsoldati.com to give a donation or pledge to vote. And I look forward to seeing you at the polls or watching the poll results from a mail-in.
Great, thank you. Jay, this one is next for you. Let me know if you want me to repeat the question.
Oh, no, that's all right. Are we doing closings also after the question?
Yes, yeah, you have a 1 minute outro after that.
So, you know, I mean, I hope the legislature gets it right. But if they don't, that's what the courts are for. You know, back the last go around, I represented, along with now Judge Honigberg, Mary Jane Wallner, Terry Norelli, the whole crew in redistricting. That's something I know very well. I'm one of the only folks that does this kind of law in the state. You know, and I think I think Cindy and maybe even Leah all live in a double gerrymander. Not only are we in the Dragon District, you know, ranging from Hinsdale to Rochester, but we're also, I think a couple of us at least, are part of Ward 5 in Concord, which was glommed off of Concord and combined with Hopkinton as a vendetta by Bill O'Brien against Mary Jane Wallner, my friend of my entire lifetime. She's been in the house as long as I've been alive, but he really hated her and he wanted her out. And guess what? She still won. So redistricting is big for me. At the end of the day, I really would like to see balance. I would like to see fairness. I see no reason not to have the districts be a little bit more fair. There shouldn't be an ultra-democratic district. I think it's very, very bad for the state for that to happen. You know, as a closing, since we are in Strafford County, again, I would just sort of stress, you know, having deep roots in a place, I think matters when you're running for office. I went to Mrs. Lorraine's kindergarten in Dover. Patrick and I have actually speculated at various points if we overlapped in elementary school, whether it was in Berwick or Somersworth or Dover. My first dog was adopted from Pacheco Valley Humane Society. The very first year they were open, and that dog's name was Bruce Springsteen. It was a girl. We renamed her Shauna. But, you know, all this is, you know, anecdote, but I think you want somebody who knows where Red Shoe Barn is, who knows how to get to Harvey's, You know, I lived in Rutland Manor and I lived in my friend's place, a homeless shelter, when my parents divorced. It was very devastating. And I will never forget what it was like. But God bless Dover, New Hampshire for having that kind of resource for a single mother with 2 young kids who could get us back on our feet. And I've never looked back. So in closing, I just say, you know, I have lived and been with the people of District 2 for my entire life in about 40% of that district. And it's Dover, it's Somersworth, and it's Concord. And I think that matters. So with that, I will pass the baton.
Great, thank you, Jay. All right, Craig, you're going to close this out for us. Let me know if you need me to repeat the question.
I think I've got it. So we need an independent redistricting commission. That's just a fact. And we've been trying to get there in the legislature, and this governor has stopped those efforts cold. You know, ultimately, I think we need to be looking at a district that isn't so warped by the influence really of the large concentration, the large population concentration in Concord. You know, for my part of the state to be equally represented in terms of the number of votes that are represented in Concord takes 28 towns. That's how many small towns are out here in the rural areas and the countryside. And we need a district that allows us to have representation too. Now, how do we get there? You know, I think it really needs to go back, like I said, to an independent redistricting commission. How will I serve the constituents in that district? Well, exactly like I've been serving them as a state representative. My job isn't just to barge ahead with ideas and preconceived notions. It's to listen. And one of the things that I have enjoyed most about being a state representative is that opportunity to listen. I've tried to answer every email that has come to me from a constituent in my district. That's a tall order. I get a lot of email, but that's our job. We are the voters' representation in Concord, and we have to try to listen even when we disagree. That's how we create some common ground, even with people on the other side. We hear their perspective, and we try to keep it in mind, even if we go against what they wish. As for an outro, you know, this race is a funny one. I mentioned earlier the need to look at where the money is coming from. My campaign didn't have to file a financial disclosure the other week because of the way it's organized. But we did anyway. We sent our financials off to the Secretary of State and said, hey, we know you don't need them right now, but would you publish them? Because we believe in transparency. So they said no, actually. They'll wait and they'll get them from us in August. But we'll be putting my financials on my website, craigthompsonfornh.com, for all the world to see, because we've got nothing to hide. We are funded as a campaign by people, by teachers, mechanics, and landscape architects, and farmers. And that is the type of representative I think we need. We don't need a full-time politician in this job. You know, as a business owner, I can walk and chew gum. I can both run my farm and raise my kids and represent the people of New Hampshire on the Executive Council. I would just close out by mentioning a couple of the people who have endorsed me in this race. Folks like Representative Ryan Buchanan, the chair of the Concord Democrats. His wife is Black. His kids are Black, even though he's just another white dude like me. But you know, he said to me, Craig, the establishment has failed us. The establishment is what has gotten us to the place where we have a militarized police force. And he said, I know you'll fight that. How about people like Michelle St. John? She has a kid who's transitioning. She knows that I will fight to make sure that kid's rights are equal and on par with everybody else's, that I will fight for that kid just like I would for anybody else. Or how about Sandy Swinburne, representative from Marlborough, who spent her career as a school psychologist and has seen the effects of underfunding our school system for decades. She knows I'll fight to change that too. So I'm Craig Thompson. If you'd like to learn more, take a look at craigthompsonfornh.com. I'd sure appreciate your vote, and I sure appreciate being here this evening. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Craig. And that is the end of our questions. So that will be the end of this forum. I just want to thank everyone for taking the time for doing this. Those are very dynamic answers. We very much appreciate it. I know I speak for the entire Strafford County Executive Committee when we say thank you for running, thank you for stepping up. I think it's great to see a wide primary for this race because it brought more attention to the Executive Council. We say in the federal government, the most powerful number is 5 because of the Supreme Court. And I think that here in New Hampshire, that 5 falls right on this council. So it's very important. And so I wish you all the best. One of you is going to win. And we're going to do our best here in the county to turn out as many voters as possible. And I'll end with a quote from my friend and former boss, Carol Porter, that public office is a public trust. I don't think there's anything people are looking for more right now than trust in their elected officials. And I think, well, that. So I really appreciate all of you doing this and taking the time. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Isaac.
it.
Good evening.
See you all.
Thank you, everybody.